August 29th, 1991, via Alfieri, Palermo. 7:35 a.m. Libero Grassi stepped out of his apartment building into the morning light. The street was waking up, metal shutters rattling open, the scent of fresh bread drifting from the corner bakery. He wore a light jacket against the summer heat. His Fiat waited at the curb, keys already in his hand. He never reached the door. A man approached. 3 shots. Close range, deliberate. Grassi collapsed beside his vehicle, blood pooling on the pavement. The gunman walked away. No one pursued him. No one shouted. The street went silent except for the echo of the shots fading into the morning air. Palermo had seen this before. The execution of a man who spoke when he should have stayed silent, who challenged what everyone accepted, who refused to pay what everyone paid. The price of defiance in Sicily. 3 bullets on a quiet street. But this was not the murder of a judge or a police officer or a politician. This was the execution of a businessman, a manufacturer of pajamas and underwear, a man whose only crime was saying no when the Mafia came calling, a man who broke the one rule that kept Palermo's economy running: silence. 7 months earlier, Libero Grassi had done something unprecedented. He received an extortion letter demanding payment, what Sicilians called pizzo, protection money, and instead of paying quietly like every other business owner in the city, he published the letter in the newspaper. On the front page, with his name attached. He declared war on the Cosa Nostra with nothing but words and principle. Now he was dead. This is the story of what happens when one ordinary man challenges an empire built on fear. It's the story of a city where paying extortion was as routine as paying taxes, where businessmen handed over envelopes of cash every month and told themselves they had no choice, where the Mafia didn't just control criminal enterprises, it controlled whether your store opened in the morning, whether your shipments arrived, whether you lived or died. Libero Grassi looked at that system and said, "No more." The Mafia made him an example, but they miscalculated. They thought killing him would restore the old order. Instead, his murder would ignite a movement that would shake Sicily to its foundations. To understand why Grassi's refusal was so dangerous, you have to understand the Palermo he lived in. The city in 1991 was not just influenced by the Mafia. It was suffocated by it. Palermo in the late 1980s and early 1990s was a city under occupation, not by a foreign army, but by an invisible government that operated from behind closed doors, in whispered conversations through intermediaries who never wrote anything down. The Cosa Nostra didn't just commit crimes in Palermo, it governed Palermo. It decided who got construction contracts. It determined which businesses succeeded and which failed. It collected substantial revenue from the city's merchants through systematic extortion. Walk through the Vucceria market in 1990 and you'd see vendors selling fish and vegetables, tourists haggling over prices, old women carrying shopping bags through narrow alleys. What you wouldn't see, what no one talked about, was the network of collection. Every vendor in that market paid. The butcher paid, the baker paid, the fruit seller paid, the cafe owner paid, even the street vendor selling knockoff handbags paid. The system was called pizzo. The word comes from the Sicilian dialect meaning beak, as in the beak that pecks at your profits month after month, year after year. It was extortion, but that word felt too crude for something so normalized. Business owners didn't even call it extortion among themselves. They called it the payment, the arrangement, the cost of doing business. Palermo's economy was split in two. There was the visible economy, shops and factories and construction sites, payrolls and invoices and bank accounts. And there was the shadow economy, the envelopes of cash handed over in parking lots. The percentages skimmed from every contract. The silent understanding that certain people got paid before anyone else. The visible economy struggled. Unemployment hovered around 15%. Young people left Sicily for Milan or Rome or Germany because there were no jobs. Factories closed, investment dried up. Meanwhile, the shadow economy thrived. The Cosa Nostra had deep infiltration in Palermo's port and dominated significant portions of wholesale markets and construction. Mafia families built fortunes trafficking heroin through the city's docks. They laundered money through restaurants and import-export companies and real estate developments. And they collected pizzo from everyone. The amounts varied widely depending on the neighborhood and the business. Estimates suggest small shops might pay hundreds of thousands of lire monthly, while medium-sized businesses might pay millions. Large construction companies paid tens of millions. The mafia was flexible. They didn't want to bankrupt you. They wanted you operating, earning, so you could keep paying forever. But it wasn't just about money. Paying pizzo meant something deeper. It meant acknowledging who really controlled your business. It meant accepting that the mafia's authority superseded the state's. It meant you were part of the system now, complicit in your own exploitation. And it meant silence. The man running the system was Salvatore Riina. They called him Toto Ucortu. Shorty Toto. He stood barely 5 feet tall with a peasant's broad face and cold, unblinking eyes. He came from Corleone, a mountain town inland from Palermo, where the mafia operated with medieval brutality. Riina rose to power through violence that shocked even other mafiosi. In the early 1980s, he waged what became known as the Second Mafia War, a campaign of systematic assassination that killed hundreds. Rival bosses, their lieutenants, their associates, their families, judges who prosecuted mafia cases, police officers who got too close, politicians who wouldn't cooperate. The war culminated in 2 murders that defined an era. On May 23, 1992, a half-ton bomb detonated under a highway outside Palermo, killing Judge Giovanni Falcone, his wife, and 3 bodyguards. 57 days later, another bomb killed Judge Paolo Borsellino and 5 police officers in downtown Palermo. But in 1991, when Libero Grassi published his letter, Riina's power was at its apex. The Corleonese faction he led controlled the Cosa Nostra's commission, the ruling body that settled disputes and authorized major operations. They controlled most of the drug trafficking through Sicily. They dominated the pizzo rackets in Palermo and surrounding cities. Under Riina, the pizzo system became more aggressive, more demanding. In the 1960s and 70s, mafia families collected protection money, but they at least pretended to provide a service, mediating disputes, preventing vandalism, offering security. By the 1990s, the pretense was gone. The message was simple: pay or face consequences. Those consequences were precise and escalating. First came warnings, a phone call from an intermediary, a casual mention in conversation. If you ignored the warnings, they destroyed property. A fire in your warehouse, delivery trucks vandalized, windows smashed. If you still refused, they hurt people. A beating, a kneecapping. And if you went to the police, they killed you. The system relied on predictability. Business owners knew the rules. Pay and you operate in peace. Refuse and you suffer. The mafia wanted fear, but they also wanted order. As long as everyone paid, everyone knew where they stood. What made pizzo so insidious was how completely it colonized the psychology of its victims. Business owners didn't just fear the mafia, they feared being the one who broke ranks. Imagine you own a small textile factory in Palermo. You employ 30 people. You've been paying pizzo for years, manageable amounts. Then one day someone tells you They heard another factory owner refuse to pay. What do you feel? Not admiration, fear. Because if that factory owner goes public, if he makes noise, the Mafia will have to respond. And their response won't be surgical. It will be visible, brutal, designed to send a message. And that violence won't just affect the rebel, it will create instability for everyone. Your business could get caught in the crossfire. Your suppliers might get nervous. Your payments might increase to compensate for lost revenue. So you don't applaud the person who refuses to pay. You resent them. You wish they'd just kept quiet and paid like everyone else. This was the genius of the pizzo system. It turned victims into enforcers. Business owners didn't need Mafia soldiers watching them. They watched each other. Anyone who stepped out of line wasn't just risking themselves. They were risking the fragile equilibrium that allowed everyone else to survive. The culture of omerta, the code of silence, wasn't just about not cooperating with police. It was about not even acknowledging the problem existed. You didn't call it extortion. You didn't complain. You didn't seek sympathy. You paid and you shut up and you pretended it was normal. When police occasionally arrested someone for extortion and asked victims to testify, most refused. Not because they feared retaliation, though they did, but because testifying meant admitting publicly that you paid. It meant your customers would know. Your competitors would know. You'd be marked as someone who gave in to pressure. Better to stay silent. Better to pretend you had control over your own business. Better to tell yourself the monthly payment was just another cost, like rent or utilities. Estimates from the early 1990s put pizzo collection in Palermo at approximately 80 billion lire annually, roughly $60 million. That money flowed into Mafia families' coffers with the regularity of tax revenue. It funded their operations, their lifestyles, their political influence. The system was so entrenched that it seemed permanent, unchallengeable. Then Libero Grassi received a letter. Libero Grassi was not a revolutionary. He was not an activist or a politician or someone with a death wish. He was a 67-year-old businessman who ran a small clothing factory in the industrial outskirts of Palermo. He manufactured underwear, pajamas, simple textile goods sold in modest shops across Sicily. His company, Sigma, employed about 100 workers. It was a family business. His son worked with him, managing production. They made decent money, nothing extravagant. They paid their taxes, treated their workers fairly, operated within the law. Grassi had been born in 1924 during Mussolini's rise into a middle-class family that valued education and hard work. He came of age during World War II when Sicily was bombed by the Allies and then occupied by American forces. He watched the Mafia re-emerge after the war, strengthened by their collaboration with American intelligence and their control of the black market. He built his business slowly, starting in the 1960s when Sicily's economy was beginning to modernize. He survived recessions, competition, the chaos of Italy's political corruption. He was known among suppliers and clients as someone who kept his word, who delivered on time, who didn't cut corners. He was also known as someone who didn't play the game. He didn't pay bribes to local officials for permits. He didn't make the customary donations to political parties. He believed stubbornly, almost naively, that honest work should be enough. This made him unusual, but not unique. Plenty of businessmen in Palermo tried to operate honestly. What made Grassi different was what he did when the Mafia finally came for him. The letter arrived in January 1991. Grassi found it slipped under the door of his factory office. No postage, no return address, just a folded sheet of paper with a brief, typewritten message. The text was blunt. It demanded payment, several million lire immediately, with monthly installments to follow. It didn't specify what the payment was for. It didn't need to. Everyone knew. The letter ended with a phone number and a warning. Don't make the wrong decision. Grassi sat at his desk and read it 3 times. He was not naive. He'd heard the stories. He knew what happened to people who refused. But as he stared at the letter, something hardened in him. He later told a journalist, "I built this company with my own hands. I employ people. I pay taxes. And now someone I've never met thinks they can take what I've earned just because they threaten me." His family reacted with alarm. His wife, Pina, urged him to be cautious. Their children, grown adults with their own families, expressed concerns. They'd heard about other businessmen who refused and wound up beaten, their businesses destroyed. "Pay the money," they told him. "It's not worth your life." But Grassi had made up his mind. He wouldn't pay. More than that, he wouldn't stay silent. Most victims who resisted went quietly to the police. They filed reports in private, hoping for protection. Grassi understood that strategy was useless. The police in Palermo were understaffed and compromised. Information leaked. Mafia informants sat in police offices and courtrooms. If you reported extortion privately, the Mafia would know within days. So Grassi decided on a different approach. He would make his refusal public. He would expose the letter, name the problem, force everyone, police, politicians, the business community, to acknowledge what was happening. On January 10th, 1991, he contacted Giornale di Sicilia, Palermo's main newspaper. He told them he had received an extortion demand and wanted to publish it. The editors were skeptical. This was unprecedented. But Grassi insisted. The letter appeared on the front page the next morning, accompanied by a statement from Grassi. In it, he addressed his extortionists directly. "I have received your letter. I will not pay. I am not afraid of you. You are cowards who live off the fear of honest people. I will not bow to your demands, and I will not be silent about them." He went further. He called out other businessmen for their complicity. "For too long, we have accepted this as normal. We pay and say nothing and tell ourselves we have no choice. But we do have a choice. We can refuse, and if enough of us refuse, this system collapses." Palermo woke up to a declaration of war. The reaction was immediate and divided. Ordinary Palermitans, workers, housewives, shopkeepers were stunned. Many admired Grassi's courage. Finally, someone was saying what everyone thought, but no one dared speak. Letters of support arrived at his factory. Strangers stopped him on the street to shake his hand. But the business community reacted with horror. Within days, Grassi faced sharp criticism from Confindustria, the Confederation of Italian Industry that represented business interests in Sicily. Business leaders argued that his public statement was reckless and dangerous. Many believed he was endangering not just himself, but every business in Palermo. The concern was straightforward. Grassi had forced the Mafia into a position where they had to respond. They couldn't let him get away with public defiance, or others might follow his example. Grassi tried to argue that collective defiance was the only solution. If businessmen stood together, if they all refused, the Mafia couldn't kill everyone. But his colleagues weren't interested. One by one, they distanced themselves from him. Confindustria issued a statement condemning extortion in general terms, but criticizing Grassi for his methods. Many in the business community questioned his judgment. Business associations that had counted Grassi as a member grew distant. Within weeks, Grassi found himself isolated. Invitations to industry events stopped coming. Suppliers who'd worked with him for years became evasive when he called. Some canceled contracts. Nobody wanted to be associated with the man who declared war on the Mafia. Even his workers grew nervous. Several quit, afraid of being collateral damage if the Mafia retaliated. Others stayed but expressed concerns about what he was doing. The isolation wasn't just professional, it was personal. The social fabric around his family began to fray. His family faced difficulties, his grandchildren encountered problems at school because of their grandfather's actions. The police response was equally frustrating. Officially, they praised Grassi's courage. The Palermo police chief gave a press conference calling him a model citizen and promising full protection. Anti-mafia prosecutors reached out, asking if he'd testify in upcoming trials, but the practical support was minimal. Grassi requested a police escort and was told resources were limited. Palermo's police force was overwhelmed. They were protecting judges, prosecutors, politicians, all of them under constant threat. A businessman, even one who'd gone public against the Mafia, was lower priority. They assigned him sporadic patrols, a police car that would circle his block once or twice a day. It was performative, a gesture meant to look like protection without actually providing it. Grassi understood the calculation. The state was willing to praise his courage, but not willing to commit resources to keep him alive. Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, the two legendary anti-mafia judges who had spent years building cases against the Cosa Nostra, publicly praised Grassi's courage. They understood how critical his stand was. If a businessman could publicly refuse to pay and survive, it would crack the entire system. But even their support was limited to public statements and moral backing. Both judges were themselves under constant threat and were focused on their own investigations and trials. They could not provide the day-to-day protection Grassi needed. The threats escalated slowly. First came anonymous phone calls to Grassi's home, a voice telling him he'd made a mistake, that there was still time to fix it, that the cost of his stubbornness would be high. Then came the intimidation tactics. Someone slashed the tires on his car. Someone spray-painted threats on the wall outside his apartment. His factory received deliveries of dead animals, rats, birds, left at the entrance. His wife worried constantly. His family pressured him to reconsider, to pay, to make it stop. But Grassi refused. He reportedly told those close to him that if he gave in now, everything he said would mean nothing. He would have to live knowing he backed down. There was something resolute in his stance. Friends who saw him in those months described a man at peace with his decision. He knew the risks. He accepted them. He seemed to believe that his stand, regardless of the outcome, would matter in the long run. In June 1991, Grassi was invited to appear on a national television program, Samarcanda, hosted by Michele Santoro. The show addressed controversial topics, and Grassi's case had become a national story. Here was a businessman taking on the Mafia with nothing but words and principle. Grassi accepted the invitation. His family expressed serious concerns. Going on television meant maximum visibility, not just in Sicily, but across Italy. It meant the Mafia couldn't ignore him. It meant they'd have to act. But Grassi saw it differently. Maximum visibility, he argued, was his best protection. The more people knew his name, the more people saw his face, the harder it would be for the Mafia to kill him quietly. He was wrong. The interview aired on June 17, 1991. Grassi sat in the studio composed and defiant. Santoro asked him why he'd gone public. Grassi explained his reasoning with a calm that bordered on serenity. "I could have paid and stayed silent like everyone else," he said, "but then I would have been complicit. I would have been part of the problem, and I don't want to live that way." Santoro pressed him. "You know they could kill you for this?" Grassi nodded. "Yes, but if I give in to that fear, I've already lost. Fear is how they control us, and I refuse to be controlled." He addressed the camera directly, speaking to other business owners. "I know you're afraid. I'm afraid too, but we outnumber them. If we stand together, they can't win. The only reason this system works is because we let it work. The interview was powerful. It was rebroadcast on news programs across Italy. Grassi became a symbol, proof that ordinary citizens could stand up to the Mafia. But in Palermo, the reaction among business owners was cold. Grassi had just made their worst fear come true. He'd put a national spotlight on the pizzo system. He'd forced the Mafia to respond publicly. And when they did respond, it wouldn't just affect him, it would send a message to everyone. Within the Cosa Nostra, Grassi's television appearance sealed his fate. Prosecutors would later conclude that the decision to kill him came from the Madonia clan, a powerful Palermo-based mafia family closely aligned with Rina's Corleonese faction. The Madonias handled enforcement actions in the city and were responsible for maintaining the extortion system in their territory. Grassi had humiliated the Mafia on national television. He'd called them cowards. He'd encouraged others to resist. Letting him live would signal weakness, and weakness in the Mafia's worldview was unacceptable. Francesco Madonia, the family's boss, assigned the contract. The method was simple: no bombs, no elaborate schemes, just a straightforward execution in broad daylight. The goal wasn't just to kill Grassi, it was to make the killing visible, to remind every business owner in Palermo what happened when you refused to pay. The morning started routinely. Grassi woke early, had breakfast with his wife. There was tension in the household. Pina remained deeply worried about the threats, about his refusal to hide or change his routines. But Grassi's routine was his armor. If he changed his life, if he acted like a man in hiding, the Mafia had already won. He left their apartment on Via Alfieri and took the stairs down to the street. It was just after 7:30 a.m. The neighborhood was waking up, shops opening, people heading to work, the morning light still soft and golden. His Fiat was parked at the curb. He had his keys out, ready to unlock the door. The gunman was waiting. Investigators would later identify him as part of the Madonia organization. The execution was quick and professional. The first shot hit Grassi in the chest. More shots followed. He stumbled and fell. The final shot was at close range. The gunman left the scene. By the time witnesses processed what they'd seen, he was gone. Grassi lay beside his car, blood spreading across the pavement. Neighbors came running. Someone screamed. Someone called the police. But Libero Grassi was already dead. The news reached his family within minutes. Pina collapsed when police came to the door. His children rushed to the scene, but police had already cordoned off the area. The body was covered with a sheet. All they could see was blood and the outline of their father's shoes. Within hours, the story was national news. Journalists descended on Palermo. Television cameras filled Via Alfieri. The murder was front page across Italy. Businessman who defied Mafia killed in broad daylight. The political response was swift and empty. The Italian president issued a statement condemning the murder and praising Grassi's courage. The interior minister promised increased efforts against extortion. Local politicians in Palermo gave speeches about the need to support anti-mafia efforts. None of it meant anything. Grassi was dead, and the message to Palermo's business community was clear. This is what happens when you refuse to pay. The first reaction in Palermo was silence. Business owners who'd privately sympathized with Grassi now kept their heads down. The murder confirmed their worst fears. The system was too strong, too ruthless. Resistance was suicide. For days, the city felt paralyzed. Then something unexpected happened. Grassi's funeral became a mass protest. Thousands of Palermitans showed up. Workers, students, housewives, shopkeepers. They filled the church and spilled out into the streets. They carried signs. Libero Grassi, hero of Sicily. We will not forget. An honest man. The funeral procession stretched for blocks. People wept openly. Some shouted in anger. The crowd wasn't just mourning one man. They were mourning all the years of fear and silence. All the times they'd paid and said nothing. All the complicity that had allowed this to happen. The rage wasn't directed only at the Mafia. It was directed at the business community that had abandoned Grassi, at the police who hadn't protected him, at the politicians who praised him but did nothing, at themselves for being too afraid to join him. News outlets across Italy covered the funeral. Grassi's face appeared on magazine covers. His story was told and retold. The businessman who refused to pay, who spoke out, who died for his principles. Anti-mafia activists seized the moment. They held rallies in Palermo and other Sicilian cities. They demanded government action, more resources for police, tougher penalties for extortion, protections for witnesses. Students organized protests at universities. For a brief moment, it seemed like Grassi's death might spark a turning point. The investigations began immediately. Palermo's anti-mafia prosecutors, led by Judge Pietro Grasso, worked to identify the killers. They had witnesses who'd seen the gunmen. Though most descriptions were vague, they analyzed ballistics, tracked mafia communications, followed leads. Within months, they had names. The murder had been ordered by Francesco Madonia and carried out by members of his organization, including a soldier named Salvatore Grigoli. Both men were already under investigation for other crimes. Arrest warrants were issued. Grigoli was caught in 1992, hiding in a farmhouse outside Palermo. Madonia was arrested later that year. They were tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison for Grassi's murder. But the arrests didn't change the underlying system. Pizzo collection continued. Businesses still paid. The mafia families that controlled Palermo were weakened by the broader anti-mafia crackdown in the 1990s, the arrests of Rina, the trials that followed the Falcone and Borsellino assassinations. But they didn't disappear. For years it seemed like Grassi had died for nothing. His stand hadn't broken the system. His death had briefly mobilized public anger. But that anger faded. Life in Palermo returned to something like normal. Business owners paid, the mafia collected. Silence prevailed. What no one realized in 1991 was that Libero Grassi had planted a seed. It would take years to sprout, but when it did, it would change Sicily. In the late 1990s, a new generation of Sicilians came of age, people who'd been teenagers when Grassi was killed. They'd grown up watching the Mafia assassinate judges, bomb civilians, strangle their cities. They'd grown up in a culture that told them to accept it, to stay silent, to pay. They decided they were done accepting. In 2004, a group of young activists in Palermo started a campaign. They printed flyers with a simple message: Un intero popolo che paga il pizzo è un popolo senza dignità. A whole people who pays pizzo is a people without dignity. The flyers appeared overnight across the city. On walls, lampposts, shop windows, the message was unsigned. The activists didn't identify themselves. They knew the risks. The phrase became a rallying cry. It captured what so many Sicilians felt but couldn't articulate: that paying pizzo wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, self-respect, the right to live without fear. The flyers led to a movement. The activists called it Addiopizzo. Goodbye, pizzo. Their goal was simple: create a network of businesses that refused to pay extortion and organize consumers to support those businesses. Addiopizzo started small. The activists compiled a list of businesses willing to publicly declare they didn't pay pizzo. They distributed the list to consumers. They created stickers that shops could display in their windows. Pizzo-free business. The first businesses to join were small. cafes, bookstores, artisan shops. Owners who were young enough or idealistic enough to take the risk. Many were motivated by Grassi's example. They'd seen his courage, his death, and they decided his sacrifice shouldn't be wasted. The movement grew slowly. Addiopizzo provided legal support for businesses that refused extortion. They connected them with lawyers who could help navigate threats and intimidation. They organized community events, critical consumption campaigns where people pledged to shop only at pizzo-free businesses. The Mafia responded with the usual tactics: threats, vandalism, intimidation. But Addiopizzo had created something the Mafia couldn't easily destroy: visibility. When a pizzo-free business was attacked, Addiopizzo publicized it. Media covered it. Community members rallied around the victim. By 2008, more than 100 businesses in Palermo had joined the network. By 2012, the number exceeded 500. The movement spread to other Sicilian cities: Catania, Messina, Agrigento. Pizzo-free businesses formed cooperatives, pooled resources, supported each other. The economic impact was real. Consumers, especially younger Sicilians, actively sought out pizzo-free businesses. Shops that displayed the Addiopizzo stickers saw increases in customers. Some business owners reported that refusing to pay pizzo had actually helped their business because it attracted customers who wanted to support ethical enterprises. The Mafia's revenue from pizzo declined. Not dramatically, extortion still generated millions of euros annually, but noticeably. More importantly, the culture began to shift. Paying pizzo was no longer universally accepted. It was increasingly seen as shameful, a betrayal of Sicily's dignity. The movement honored Grassi's memory explicitly. Addiopizzo activists visited his grave on the anniversary of his death. They quoted his words in their campaigns. They told his story to school groups, university students, anyone who would listen. Grassi became a symbol, not just of resistance, but of the idea that one person's courage could matter. That standing alone, even if it cost you everything, could inspire others. That defiance, however futile it seemed, could plant seeds that would bloom years later. Schools across Sicily began teaching about Grassi. His story appeared in textbooks. Streets and squares were named after him. In 2011, on the 20th anniversary of his death, the city of Palermo dedicated a memorial to him, a plaque on Via Alfieri marking the spot where he'd been killed. His family became public advocates. His son, Davide, spoke at anti-mafia conferences. He partnered with Addiopizzo, met with business owners, shared his father's story. "My father believed that one honest voice could change things," David said. He was right. It just took longer than he expected. By the 2000s, the Cosa Nostra's power in Sicily had diminished significantly. The arrests and trials of the 1990s had decimated their leadership. Younger mafiosi lacked the authority and discipline of the old guard. Internal conflicts weakened the organization. Competing criminal groups, Camorra from Naples and 'Ndrangheta from Calabria, moved into territories the Cosa Nostra once controlled. The pizzo system still existed, but it was less pervasive. Businesses in some neighborhoods continued to pay, but in others, the mafia's grip had loosened. The culture of silence, omertà, was breaking down. More victims reported extortion. More witnesses testified in trials. None of this happened because of Libero Grassi alone. The transformation of Sicily was the result of decades of work by judges, police, activists, journalists, ordinary citizens. But Grassi's stand was a critical moment. It proved resistance was possible. It showed that one person without power or protection could challenge the system and make a mark. What did Libero Grassi accomplish? He didn't destroy the Mafia. He didn't end extortion in Palermo. He didn't even save his own life. But he changed the conversation. Before Grassi, paying pizzo was something everyone did in private and no one discussed in public. It was shameful, but invisible. Grassi dragged it into the light. He forced people to confront it, to name it, to choose a side. He showed that silence was a choice, that complicity was a choice, that accepting fear as inevitable was a choice. And he showed that defiance, even futile defiance, even defiance that cost you everything, mattered. The Mafia killed him to send a message. This is the price of resistance. But the message backfired. His death didn't terrify people into submission. It radicalized them. It turned him into a martyr. It gave the anti-mafia movement a face, a story, a symbol of what they were fighting for. There's a concept in political movements called the propaganda of the deed. The idea that one dramatic action can communicate more powerfully than 1,000 speeches. Grassi's refusal to pay, his public denunciation, his television appearance, and finally, his murder. All of it combined into a narrative that resonated far beyond Sicily. He became proof that ordinary people could stand up to criminal empires, that you didn't need to be a judge or a police officer or a politician to make a difference. That courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite fear. In 2021, 30 years after his death, the Italian government posthumously awarded Libero Grassi the Gold Medal for Civil Valor, the nation's highest civilian honor. The ceremony was held in Palermo. His family attended. So did members of Addiopizzo, business owners who'd refused to pay pizzo, students who'd studied his story. The president of Italy gave a speech. He called Grassi a hero of the Republic and a symbol of civic courage. He said Grassi's legacy was a reminder that freedom is never free. It must be defended every day by ordinary people willing to take extraordinary risks. The rhetoric was grand, but what mattered more were the people in the audience. Business owners who joined Addiopizzo, students who'd grown up learning about Grassi in school, young Sicilians who'd inherited a Sicily less suffocated by fear than the one Grassi had lived in. They were his legacy, not the speeches or the memorials, but the culture that had shifted, however slightly because of what he'd done. Today, pizzo still exists in Sicily. The Mafia still operates. But the system Libero Grassi challenged in 1991 is weaker, more contested, less total. Hundreds of businesses refuse to pay. Thousands of Sicilians support those businesses. Schools teach children that resistance is possible. Is that enough? Is that worth what Grassi paid? Those are questions without easy answers. His family would likely say no. They lost a husband, a father, a grandfather. They lived with threats and fear and grief. The cost was too high. But ask the business owner in Palermo who displays an Addiopizzo sticker and refuses to pay, who operates freely without monthly envelopes of cash, who tells his children they don't have to live in fear. And he might say yes. That Grassi's sacrifice created the space for his freedom. Both things are true. The cost was too high and the impact was real. August 29, 1991. Via Alfieri, Palermo. 3 shots. 1 life ended. But also one question posed to an entire society. How long will you accept this? How long will fear dictate your choices? How long will silence be your answer? Libero Grassi didn't destroy the Cosa Nostra. He didn't even survive his defiance. But he cracked the foundation of the system by proving that one voice, speaking in truth, refusing to be silent, could not be ignored. The Mafia thought killing him would restore order. Instead, it created a martyr. They thought fear would spread. Instead, rage spread. They thought business owners would learn their lesson. Instead, a generation learned a different lesson, that complicity has a cost too. That paying pizzo isn't just about money, it's about dignity. And that silence, however safe it seems, is its own form of death. Grassi's story is not a fairy tale. There is no happy ending. The Mafia still exists. Extortion still happens. Fear still controls people's choices. But the grip is looser. The silence is less total. The culture has shifted. And every business owner in Sicily who refuses to pay, every consumer who shops at a pizzo-free store, every student who learns Grassi's name in school, they are carrying forward the defiance of a man who died for one principle: that some things are worth refusing even when refusal costs you everything. Libero Grassi never saw the movement that would rise from his death. He never knew that his name would be taught in schools, that streets would bear his name, that thousands of Sicilians would follow his example. He died believing, perhaps, that his stand had failed. But he was wrong. His defiance echoed. It rippled outward year after year, touching people he never met, inspiring actions he never witnessed. The Mafia gave him a choice: pay or die. He chose a third option. He chose to speak. And in speaking, he shattered the illusion that silence was the only way to survive. That is the price of defiance, and that is the power of one voice, refusing to be silenced. August 29th, 1991. Via Alfieri, Palermo. 3 bullets ended a life, but they could not kill an idea. And in the end, the idea proved stronger than the empire that tried to silence it.